The wind carried the smell of rain and the past, brushing against the warped sign that read, Gallows Creek, Pop. 87, though the town hadn't counted for years. The desert dusk settled like a worn blanket over the rooftops of Gallows Creek, thick with the scent of lightning, old timber, and the hush of something not yet broken. Above the cracked wooden arch that once welcomed mail coaches and hopeful settlers, the sign creaked on a single nail, swaying against the slow breath of a gathering storm. Beyond it, the town stretched just far enough to be called one. A dry well, a leaning chapel, 3 main streets that bled into cactus and rock, and one saloon with lamps that burned through the dust like stubborn memories. Inside the silver lantern, the light was soft, catching in the dull polish of bottles too old to shine. The bar smelled of aged whiskey, pipe smoke, and dried lemon rinds. Behind it, Silas Mercer stood with the solemn patience of a man who had once measured time in bullets, but now marked it with clean glasses and quiet nods. His right hand moved in small circles across a cloudy tumbler, while his left hovered idly, not quite still, not quite ready to rest. Outside, thunder murmured low, like a bad memory stirring. Long ago, a preacher dying by a roadside had told Silas that judgment didn't come with fire. It came in the quiet before the storm. When a man heard only his own heartbeat and had to decide if he liked the rhythm of it. That thought visited him now, uninvited, as the wind slipped through the floorboards beneath his boots. At a back table, Dr. Thaddeus Quinn squinted at a wrinkled newspaper, his glasses perched near the tip of his nose, like they'd wandered there on their own. The article was 2 months old, about a land dispute up in Prescott. He didn't read it for news. He read it to remember the world was still moving. Near the window, Clara Baines stood at the ledger, copper hair tucked in a loose bun, counting coins into their proper stacks. She hummed under her breath, the kind of sound that didn't fill a room so much as settle into it. $3 short, she said after a while. Check old Eli's tab, Silas replied, not looking up. She did, and sure enough, Eli had helped himself to 2 bottles and left a single dime behind. Clara made a noise that sat somewhere between a sigh and a chuckle. You keep track of every bottle that leaves here, she said, looking at him sidelong. But you can't remember to eat breakfast. Silas's mouth twitched. Whiskey's easier to account for than hunger. Poetry now? She teased. He gave no reply, just resumed polishing. Out the window, a gust rattled the sign again. The storm was coming closer, but it moved like a man taking his time, unhurried, unbothered, full of certainty. Clara's gaze lingered on the road, then flicked back to Silas. You ever think about taking a day off? She asked. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to matter. What would I do with a day off, Miss Baines? Walk, she said. Talk. Ride out and watch the sky. Let someone else sweep the floor. Floor's already swept, Silas said. She shook her head, smiling without mirth. There was something heavy in the room that didn't belong to the storm, something born of 5 years of half-conversations and unopened doors. The saloon was nearly empty, just the doctor, Clara, and old Eli, who nursed a warm bottle of rye like it was medicine. The wind outside rattled the shutters, then fell still again. The saloon door creaked, and the stillness broke. Sheriff Amos Kettler stepped in, wiping dust from his coat and muttering to himself. His badge, dulled with age, caught the light like a worn-out star. He took his usual spot at the bar, nodding at Silas, then Clara. Evenin', he said. Smells like rain. Smells like something else, Dr. Quinn replied from the corner. Kettler turned to Silas. Got a wire from Dry Cedar Bluff. Vexler boys hit a bank 2 towns north, left 3 dead, 2 more missing. Silas's hands didn't pause, but Clara behind the bar watched him carefully. They coming this way? She asked. Kettler rubbed his jaw. Don't know. Word is they're heading south. We're on that path. Thought they kept near the railroad, Quinn muttered. Until the railroad got wise, Kettler said. Now they're looking for softer towns. Towns that don't matter enough to fight back. Clara straightened. We've got nothing worth their trouble. Kettler gave her a long look. That's what Tanner said in Cedar Bluff. Silas set down the glass, traced the rim with his thumb, then picked up another. How many in the gang now? Quinn asked. Kettler exhaled through his nose. 6. Maybe more. Red Jack Vexler, Clay Thorne, Reed brothers, that kid, Lucas Reeves, and others drifting in. Reeves? Clara asked. He's just a boy. A boy with fast hands and something to prove, Kettler replied. The doctor closed his paper. You send word to Carson? Already did, but they're 3 days out, and Vexler don't move that slow. Silas leaned slightly, shifting his weight. His face stayed calm, but Clara noticed his right hand moved closer to the low shelf under the bar. We'll keep the saloon open, he said quietly. Routine helps. You think they'll come tonight? Kettler asked. Storm's coming, and they like to move under cover. So, yes. Kettler frowned. That's mighty certain. Just arithmetic, Silas replied. Another silence. Eli hiccuped, muttered something about his horse being smarter than him, and shuffled out, bottle in hand. The doctor rose, picking up his bag. You know, Silas, he said at the door. That medicine I ordered came in. Silas nodded. Headaches again. Quinn gave him a long look. That's right. Headaches. Clara crossed her arms. You haven't had a headache in 5 years. Silas didn't answer. Didn't have to. A sharp crack of thunder rattled the glass panes. Grace Tully entered from the side, her voice already humming something low and sad. Her red dress was faded at the hem, and her shoes had seen better years. But when she sang, even warming up, the air changed. Clara moved to the window. Rider comin' fast. Silas turned, catching the silhouette galloping down the main stretch. Hooves hammered mud. The rider didn't slow until he hit the saloon steps and nearly fell through the door. Sheriff, he shouted. They're comin'. Vexler's gang. They torched Cedar Bluff, shot the sheriff, cut down the deputies. They're comin' this way. The room froze. Silas set down the glass he was holding. The sound was soft, but it landed like thunder. His body shifted. Small movements. All precise, the way a mountain lion might stretch before the kill. How far? Kettler asked. Hour, maybe less, the boy panted. They're killin' everyone, laughin' while they do it. Clara's hand went to her mouth. Kettler turned. We locked the town down. Doors barred. No one on the streets after dark. He turned to Clara. Close up early. No, Silas said. The voice wasn't loud, but it was final. Everyone looked at him. We keep it open, like always. Clara blinked. Why? Silas didn't answer her. Not directly. He looked past her, out the window, into the darkness rolling in like memory. Some folks, he said, need to learn that the quietest rattler strikes the deepest. And then he turned back to the bar, picked up a glass, and started polishing again. But the motion, once soft, had a new edge to it, like a man who'd stopped hiding what he was. The past has a long ride, but it always finds its way home, Silas mutters, as lightning flashes across the empty road leading into Gallows Creek. The desert doesn't whisper warnings. It sends thunder before the bullet. The morning came pale and unwilling, casting thin light across the rooftops of Gallows Creek, like a hand reluctant to wake a sleeping child. Rain hadn't yet come, but the sky had the look of something brooding, swollen clouds trailing across the horizon in long, bruised lines, too heavy for wind to move. Behind the Silver Lantern Saloon, a rusty horseshoe swung on a nail, creaking as it turned back and forth. The air smelled of chalky dirt, tin roof dust, and the iron promise of lightning still waiting to fall. Everything was quieter than usual, as if the town were trying not to breathe too loud. Silas Mercer stood alone outside the saloon, leaning on the rail with a tin cup cooling in his hand. He wasn't watching anything in particular, just the space between buildings, the places where sound used to come from. A tumbleweed, ragged and sun-bleached, crept along the street like it was trying to flee before anyone noticed. Years ago, a dying man told him that fear had a sound, not screaming or shooting, but the absence of everything else. It was the quiet of folks who knew something bad was coming and had run out of ways to stop it. That was the sound in Gallows Creek now. The purpose of this day, though unspoken, had settled on everyone's shoulders. Prepare for what might come, even if they still hoped it wouldn't. There would be no riding out, no lawmen coming in time. The town's salvation, if it came, would have to wear the face of someone they already knew. Sheriff Amos Kettler limped out of the telegraph office, his coat caught at one shoulder and his jaw tight. The wire had been sent again, twice now, but the lines to Carson City were slow and brittle. Even if help came, it would be days too late. His eyes scanned the street and landed on Silas. Kettler crossed over, tipping his hat. "Ryder said they'd be here by last night," he said. "Could be they changed course." Silas sipped the coffee. "Could be they stopped to reload." "You always were a cheerful one." "I've learned not to count on timing, just on patterns." Kettler looked up at the sky. "Storm's still holding off." Silas said nothing. Across the street, Old Man Harlan was boarding up the windows of the old stagecoach office, though no coach had passed through in 3 years. He muttered to himself with every nail he hammered in, talking about how the dust was thicker than it used to be, and how the desert remembered blood. 2 wagons over, Mrs. Jarrow was dragging a washbin inside while her young boy clutched her skirt and asked why Papa wasn't home yet. She didn't answer. Silas took note of every movement, not out of paranoia, just the habit of a man who had once lived on inches and shadows. Clara stepped out of the saloon, brushing flour off her hands and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her apron was dusted white from morning bread. She paused when she saw the 2 men. "Just had 3 folks ask if we're opening like normal," she said. Silas gave the slightest nod. "You're really set on this, aren't you?" "If we close the doors," Silas said, "then fear already won." Clara's eyes searched his. She didn't ask what he meant. Not really. Instead, she handed him a warm biscuit wrapped in cloth and turned to go back in. Inside the saloon, Dr. Quinn sat at the same table, glasses halfway down his nose again, though he wasn't reading this time. He was writing something. A letter, perhaps, or a ledger. His pen scratched slow and steady. He didn't look up when Silas entered. "Storm's coming," the doctor said, unprompted. Silas nodded. "So's Vexler." The doctor stopped writing. "You sure?" "No. But I'm not wrong." "You've been wrong before." "Yes, but not about this." Dr. Quinn folded the paper, slid it into his bag, and pulled out a worn roll of bandages. "I checked the medicine crate. Plenty of morphine. Almost out of thread. Never thought we'd run out of thread." Clara was restocking bottles behind the bar, but her hands moved slower than usual. Her gaze kept drifting to the back room, where a scattergun rested under a loose floorboard. She hadn't touched it in 5 years, but last night she'd oiled it, just in case. "I always wondered," she said, not looking at Silas. "Why here?" Silas didn't pretend not to understand. "Because it was quiet," he said, "and it didn't ask questions." "That why you never left?" He took a long time before answering. "Because no one else knew who I used to be." Outside, hoofbeats echoed again, fast, but not reckless. 2 riders entered town just past midday, pulling their horses to a cautious stop in front of the saloon. Their coats were stiff with dust and salt, and one of them looked like he'd been riding since Texas. Dr. Quinn moved to the window. "You know them?" "No," Silas replied. The riders stepped inside, removing their hats and squinting at the sudden dimness. "Whiskey," the older one said. "If you've got it." Clara poured. Silas watched. "You come through Cedar Bluff?" he asked. The older man nodded. "Just this morning. God almighty. It was—" He trailed off, eyes going distant. "They didn't just rob the bank," he continued. "They made a show of it. Killed the schoolmaster in front of the children, hung the postman from a signpost with his own bag. And the sheriff—" "What about the sheriff?" Clara asked, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. "They made him watch while they shot his men," the younger rider said, then tied him to his horse and sent him out alone. The saloon went still. Dr. Quinn's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee. "How many dead?" he asked. "7 that we saw. Might be more." Silas didn't speak. He didn't move. But the change was visible, the kind of stillness that comes just before something explodes. He walked to the back shelf, opened a cabinet no one ever touched, took down a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, the good stuff, uncorked it, poured 2 shots, set them down. The younger rider tried to make light of it, voice shaking as he joked, "Lucky for us you've got a sheriff here. Right?" Clara flinched. The room went silent. Silas turned slowly. "They say Red Jack Vexler's got 23 notches on his gun," the young man continued, still trying to sound brave. "That true?" The sound that followed was soft, almost a sigh, but it had the shape of something darker underneath. "Man who needs to count that high," Silas said quietly, "is compensating." The boy frowned. "What would you know about it? You're just a—" "That's enough," Clara snapped. Voice sharp as a cracked whip. "Silas, could you check the cellar? I think we're low on bourbon." Silas nodded once and walked away. As he passed Dr. Quinn, the doctor asked in a low voice, "Old wound bothering you?" Silas gave the faintest reply. "Not yet, but it will be." Down in the cellar, the air was cooler, but not calmer. It smelled of damp earth and dry secrets. Silas knelt by a wooden crate, opened it slowly. Nestled among bottles and rags was a revolver, old, worn smooth by time and memory. He ran his thumb over the grip. It didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like an oath, buried. He closed the crate, took a deep breath, and climbed the steps again. Above, Grace Tully had started a new song. This one wasn't about love or whiskey. It was about snakes in gardens and storms that couldn't be outrun. Her voice trembled near the end of each note, but she kept singing. Sheriff Kettler returned, soaked in sweat and dust. He approached Clara and Silas with urgency. "I sent a second wire," he said. "But even if they ride hard, they'll never make it in time." Clara looked toward the cellar door. "What about him?" she asked. Kettler hesitated. "Some secrets are best left buried." "But some don't stay buried," Clara replied. "And we're out of time." Before the sheriff could answer, the saloon doors burst open. 3 cowhands, faces pale as bone, stumbled in. "Found a body," one gasped. "Out by the old crossing. Shot clean through the skull. Execution style." "Who?" Kettler asked. The youngest removed his hat. "Jimmy Carter, kid from the general store." Silas turned. His jaw clenched. His right hand drifted to the scar just above his belt. "His horse was still saddled," the cowhand said. "He weren't dead more than an hour." Clara put her hand over her mouth. Dr. Quinn closed his eyes. Kettler looked at Silas. "They're closer than we thought." Clara finally spoke. "Maybe it's time to—" The sound of shattering glass stopped her. One of the riders had dropped his bottle, But it wasn't the sound that froze the room. It was what followed. Gunfire. Distant, faint, but unmistakable, followed by screams. Silas emerged from the cellar, no longer a shadow behind the bar. There was something different in the way he walked, something remembered. "Get these folks out," he said to Kettler. The sheriff stared. "You sure?" Silas nodded once. "They can still make it home." "What about you?" Silas looked at him with eyes that had once watched men die without blinking. "I'll keep the saloon open." Kettler turned to Clara. "You too." "This is my place," she said. Silas shook his head. "Please, don't argue." Something in his voice made her pause. She had never heard it before. "Silas, who were you before you came here?" He replies, flatly, someone who knew what fear felt like. Not every man who lays down his gun does so out of peace. Some do it out of fear they might use it again. The storm crested sometime after nightfall, rolling across the ridges with all the fury of something long denied. The wind peeled shingles from roofs and bent signposts to their knees, yet the Silver Lantern Saloon stood undisturbed, not untouched, but unshaken. Its oil lamps flickered through the window panes like tiny watchfires. Steady despite the battering dark. The streets outside, once lively with laughter and boot steps, lay empty now, washed in mud and fear. Inside, a thick tension hung between the brass fixtures and cracked leather stools. Candlelight caught the dust in the air, illuminating it like motes of memory floating in a world gone quiet. The piano, though untouched, seemed to hum with the same low vibration that buzzed beneath the floorboards, the sense that something was coming, something that couldn't be turned back. Silas Mercer stood behind the bar, sleeves rolled up, vest undone, shoulders relaxed in a way that was anything but restful. His left hand rested atop the bar, like it belonged there. His right stayed close to the edge, fingers idle, but ready. There was no glass in his hands now, no bottle needing wiping. The pretense of bartending had ended when the gunfire started 2 ridges over. From the doorway, the wind brought in the scent of wet horses and damp leather, followed by the sharp iron stink of gun oil. The door itself did not creak. It cracked open, kicked inward with enough force to slam against the interior wall. Thunder rumbled behind it. Gideon Redjack Vexler stepped into the room. He was taller than expected, flame-red hair plastered to his skull by rain, a soaked scarlet bandana hanging loose at his throat. His long black duster bore the marks of many places: dried blood, horse sweat, bullet holes stitched closed with rough thread. He moved like a man used to taking what he wanted, and never asking twice. Behind him came Clay Thorne, narrow-eyed and hollow-cheeked, hands twitching as though the promise of violence itched just beneath his skin. Then the Reed twins, walking in perfect unison, their faces pale and vacant, as though cut from the same stone. Last through the door was Lucas Hoof Reeves, youngest of the bunch, practically bouncing with eagerness and fear, his eyes wide, breath already ragged from adrenaline. Vexler surveyed the room. "Well," he said, his voice too smooth for a man who had just crossed a path of corpses. "Ain't this cozy?" Silas did not move. "Whiskey?" Vexler chuckled and dropped into a chair, boots flung up on the table with casual disrespect. "Leave the bottle." Without speaking, Silas reached for the top shelf and pulled down a full bottle of Old Pines. His movements were exact, not rushed, not slow, just deliberate. As he poured, 5 sets of eyes locked onto him, reading every shift of his shoulders, every angle of his reach. He gave them nothing in return. "You boys ain't from around here," he said, placing the bottle and 5 glasses on the table. "What gave it away?" asked one of the Reeds, grinning like a skull. "The way you carry your guns," Silas answered. "Low on the hip, railroad style. Men out here draw from higher." The temperature in the room dropped. Vexler leaned forward slightly. "You know a lot about guns for a man who wipes glasses." "A man learns things," Silas said, voice quiet, even. Reeves let out a bark of laughter, then drew his pistol in a flashy spin, the barrel twirling around his index finger. "And what'd you learn about this?" Silas didn't look at him. "That's a good way to shoot yourself." The gang laughed, all except Vexler, who never took his eyes off the bartender. "You got a name, Barkeep?" "Silas. Just Silas. Just Silas." Vexler's smirk twisted. Without warning, he swiped his arm across the table, sending the bottle and glasses crashing to the floor. The smash echoed like a shot. Liquor splashed across the worn floorboards. "Well, just Silas," he said, rising slowly. "I think you're lying to me, and I don't much care for liars." Silas's face remained unreadable. "That bottle was $8. Thorne laughed. The twins snorted, but Vexler didn't. He stepped forward, tossing a coin onto the bar. "There's 2 bits. Buy yourself some manners." Silas looked at the coin, looked back at Vexler. "You're short by $7.75. Vexler's eyes darkened. "Thorne," he said softly, "teach our friend here a lesson." Thorne cracked his knuckles and started forward, but before he could reach across the bar, the saloon doors swung open again with a thunderclap of wind and rain. Sheriff Amos Kettler stood in the doorway. His badge glinted under the lamplight. One hand rested on the butt of his Colt, the other slightly raised in a show of calm. "Evenin', gentlemen," he said. "Might want to reconsider whatever you're thinking." Vexler grinned like a man pulling teeth. "Well, look here. The law, in this little dust heap." Kettler didn't blink. "Way I hear it, Cedar Bluff's missing a sheriff and some deputies." Vexler's smile didn't fade, but something in it turned bitter. "Can't say I know anything about that," he said, "but I heard a story, that their marshal was a coward, hid while good men died." "You're not a coward, are you?" he asked, his hand drifting toward his belt. Everything happened at once. Vexler moved fast, faster than a man his size should, and his revolver cleared leather with a snap. But Kettler was trained and steady, and his own gun was halfway up when the shot came. It was Vexler who fired. Kettler staggered backward, blood blooming bright across his chest. His knees gave, his gun clattered to the floor. "Bob." Clara's voice rang from somewhere behind the saloon. Vexler holstered his pistol slowly, turning back to the bar. "Now," he said, "where were we?" Thorne stepped forward again. Silas didn't move, but his hands had stopped their idle dance, his shoulders had straightened. And his eyes belonged to someone else now. "Been a long time since I killed a man," he murmured. "Kill him," Vexler ordered. Thorne reached across the bar. Silas's hand snapped out, caught Thorne's wrist, and slammed his face into the wood with a wet crunch. The man dropped instantly, blood streaking from his nose. The Reed twins drew in perfect unison. Silas's Colt was already in his hand. The first shot hit Samuel Reed in the shoulder, spinning him into a wall. The second hit Daniel Reed's pistol, sending it clattering across the floor. Reeves hesitated, just a blink, but that was enough. "Last chance," Silas said, voice low, calm. "Take your friend and ride out. Don't make me break my promise." Vexler laughed, but it sounded strained. "Promise? I promised I wouldn't kill again." Reeves shook his head, stepped forward. "No one calls me kid," he growled and drew. Silas shot him clean through the hand. Reeves screamed and dropped to the floor. Clutching the bloody mess of fingers, Vexler's smile vanished. "You're not just a bartender," he said. "No," Silas replied, lifting the Colt. "Not always." "Then who the hell are you?" The answer came with thunder. "Used to call me the Dusk Wraith." The words dropped into the room like lead, and even the rain outside seemed to pause. Vexler's eyes widened. Claythorne moaned from the floor. The Reed twins stopped moving entirely. "Thought he was dead," Daniel Reed whispered. "Most legends are," Silas replied, "until someone wakes them up." He reached under the bar and pulled out a double-barreled shotgun, set it on the counter, didn't raise it. "Only one shot left in the Colt," he said, "and this won't take all of you." Vexler straightened. "Then you're bluffing." "Maybe. But first man to draw gets both barrels. I don't even need to aim." He tapped a small wire at his boot. Vexler followed the line with his eyes, saw it run behind the bar to the shotgun trigger. Silas shrugged. "Like you said, just arithmetic." The room held its breath. Then, from outside, a crash. Another rider shouting, "They're coming! There's more of them!" Vexler turned to the door, eyes blazing. Clara stepped from the shadows behind the bar, rifle raised. Silas didn't look at her, but his voice was firm. "Get behind the bar. Now." "There's more coming," a boy cries. "A dozen riders. One of 'em's yelling your name, Mercer." A town built on buried secrets will always sink when it rains. The rain had turned to mist by sunrise, but the red clay earth held fast to the night's violence, bleeding into the gutters, sticking to boots like old sins. Gallows Creek lay breathless, as if waiting for its own eulogy, each building watching the horizon with windows like eyes gone hollow. Behind the silver lantern, the bodies of Claythorne and Samuel Reed had been dragged to the chapel steps. No one said the prayers. The church bell had rusted through 2 summers ago, and nobody thought to fix it. In a place like this, mercy had a shorter lifespan than justice. Inside the saloon, the tables were overturned, glass crunched underfoot, and the smell of gunpowder hadn't yet faded. The bar still stood, battered, scorched, but upright, like its keeper. Silas Mercer hadn't slept. He sat with his back to the wall, his coat draped across his shoulders, watching the door with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much light leave too many faces. His Colt rested on the table in front of him, and beside it, a folded piece of paper, yellowed, creased, sealed in wax with the faint insignia of a burned-out town marshal's office. Clara moved through the wreckage, picking up broken chairs and setting them gently against the wall. She didn't speak until she passed him. "You read it yet?" she asked, nodding to the letter. Silas shook his head. "You planning to?" "Soon." She hesitated, wiped dust from her sleeve, then sat across from him. "I know what it is," she said quietly. "Doc Quinn told me." Letter from him. Silas closed his eyes for a moment. The memory swelled. A younger man in a brown coat, hands bloodied, badge burned to ash in his pocket, riding away from a fire with a baby in his arms and a letter stuffed into his boot. "It was supposed to be opened if I ever picked up the gun again," he murmured. Clara stared at him, her voice soft, but insistent. "You already did." Outside, the sky broke in places, light slipping through as reluctant streaks across the ground. Sheriff Kettler had survived the gunshot, though he bled through bandages and grit his teeth against the pain. He sat slumped on the doctor's cot in the rear storeroom, one hand gripping a half-full glass of morphine water. The other pressed to his ribs. Doc Quinn hovered near, stitching with shaking fingers. "You need to talk to him," Quinn said. "If there's more coming, we need answers." Kettler coughed, winced. "You think he'll listen to me?" Quinn set down the needle. "He listens to the dead. Maybe it's time we become ghosts." In the street, the boy who'd carried the warning the night before stood near the water trough, brushing mud from his horse's flanks. He turned toward the chapel ruins and squinted at the cracked stone cistern behind it. "Something wrong?" asked Grace Tully, approaching with a covered basket. "Don't know," the boy said. "Heard something strange in the night. Near that well." Grace followed his gaze. The cistern had been dry for years, sealed with boards and rope. Folks used to say it whispered at night. Silas once said it was the wind. The preacher before him said it was sin. Silas appeared beside them, silent as ever. "Show me," he said. Together they approached the well. The boards were weather-warped but intact, except one which had been torn loose recently, nails still bent like broken fingers. Grace knelt, touched the stone edge. Her fingers came away dark. "Not water," she whispered. Silas said nothing. He took a lantern from the saddlebag nearby and descended into the shaft by a rope that had no business still holding weight. At the bottom, he found bones. 3 skeletons, slumped in unnatural poses, robes still clinging to one, rusted spurs on another, and beneath them, a metal box, scorched black, wrapped in oilcloth. He didn't open it. Not there. He climbed back out, the lantern shaking in his hand. "Who are they?" the boy asked. Silas brushed dust from his coat. "Old debt." He brought the box to the saloon, placed it on the bar, and pulled Clara aside. "Before I came here," he said, "I worked south, under another name. Wore a badge until I couldn't anymore." Clara waited. "There was a town, Red Hollow, burned to the ground in one night, all except the chapel and a dozen graves. They said it was a gang. I said it was the sheriff." Her brow furrowed. "You think Wexler?" "I think this ain't the first time he's lit fire to silence truth." He unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside the box lay an old journal, half burned, names written in faded ink, ending on the final page with a line that made Clara gasp. "Silas Mercer, traitor or redeemer, time will tell." There was more. Beneath the journal, a star, bent, charred, from Red Hollow, and under that, a photograph. 5 men, 1 woman standing before the chapel. Wexler was there, younger, smiling, and so was Silas. Before she could speak, the door flew open again, this time no storm, no outlaws, just Lucas Reeves, blood still bandaged from the shot to his hand. He stood swaying, eyes wide. "You need to come. Now. They found it. They know." Silas rose. "What did they find?" Reeves looked around the saloon. "Your name. Your past. They're telling everyone. They say you rode with Wexler, that you helped burn Red Hollow." The silence fell like a stone. "Is it true?" Clara asked, voice barely audible. Silas didn't lie. "I was there." She stepped back. "Why?" "Because I thought I was cleaning up the territory. I didn't know Wexler had his own reasons. By the time I saw it, it was too late." "You could have said something. And who would have listened?" Outside, voices began to rise. The townsfolk gathered near the chapel were murmuring, pointing toward the saloon. Doc Quinn came through the rear door. "They're asking questions. Loud ones." Kettler, arm still bloodied, stood beside him. "We don't have much time," he rasped. Clara looked at Silas. "What are you going to do?" He walked to the door, pushed it open, and stepped onto the porch. The people stared. A crowd of 30, maybe more. Faces he'd served whiskey to, hands he'd steadied during grief, eyes now filled with suspicion, anger, confusion. "I never lied," Silas said, voice clear. "But I didn't tell the truth either." Grace stepped forward. "You rode with him." Silas nodded. "Before he became who he is now, I thought I could do good from inside." Old Man Harlan spat. "You burned churches." "I tried to stop it," Silas said. "They left me in the fire." Kettler stepped beside him. "We've all done things we ain't proud of, but I bled for this town, and I say we need every gun we can hold." Harlan shook his head. "We trusted you." Silas let the words hang. Then someone threw a stone. It struck the saloon post, shattering into dust. No one moved to stop the next. But before it could come, Clara stepped forward. "This man saved your sheriff, saved your doctor, saved me. You want to throw stones? Do it after we survive what's coming." The townsfolk hesitated. Then the bell rang. 3 short clangs, the signal the Ridge Rider used when someone was spotted at the edge of town. "Riders," shouted the boy. 6 of them, flying Vexler's mark. Silas turned, jaw tight. "It's starting." "There's a 7th rider," says Grace, staring through her spyglass. "He's got a badge around his neck, burned straight through. Some wounds ain't meant to close. They stay open so the truth can breathe." The sun rose crimson, like an old eye reopened after a long silence, casting its gaze over the jagged hills beyond Broken Mesa. Wind tore low across the basin, curling dust up in snake shapes, moaning through the hollows, where once long ago miners had dug for silver and instead found only sorrow. It was no place for cattle or crops, but it was the perfect place for ghosts. Silas stood atop the ridge alone. Below him, across the cracked valley floor, the 7 riders advanced in formation. Vexler's mark burning red on their armbands, their silhouettes hardened against the morning haze. The 7th man rode behind the rest, slow and deliberate, with something hanging around his neck that glinted dark in the light. A badge, scorched and twisted into a crooked star. Silas knew that badge, knew the hand that once pinned it to his coat. It had belonged to Marshal Redden Call, the man who'd recruited him into Red Hollow's lawman circle, the man who'd called him the conscience of the crew, even as they rode into fire. Silas had seen Call die, or thought he had. Back then, Call had gone down in the church blaze, screaming for redemption no one offered. But now he rode again, and the past had risen from the ashes with teeth. Behind Silas, on the slope, Sheriff Kettler limped up with Clara and the boy close behind. "Don't suppose they've come to negotiate," the sheriff muttered, squinting at the riders. "No," Silas said, voice hoarse. "They've come to finish what we left undone." Clara studied him, eyes searching. "Is that man?" "Yes. You said he was dead." "I thought he was." She turned to Kettler. "And you still want to make a stand?" The sheriff looked at the valley, then at Silas. "There's a scar down there. On the far side of Broken Mesa. You can't see it from here. That's where they buried the miners who tried to stand up to Call's men 15 years ago. Folks who stayed when they should have run. It's where the town learned silence." He paused. "I say we give 'em a new story." Back at Gallows Creek, the townsfolk had gathered by the chapel, guns in trembling hands, hiding fear with defiance. Grace Tully was handing out cartridges. Doc Quinn packed makeshift bandages into saddlebags. Even Old Man Harlan stood by the saloon door with a hammer and a box of nails, ready to barricade or rebuild, depending on how the day went. The boy, young Jesse, had drawn a crude map of the valley and marked the paths with colored chalk. "They'll split," he said. 4 to the front, 2 to circle wide. That 7th rider stays back." Silas knelt beside him. "Good eyes. Where'd you learn to read a battlefield?" "My pa," Jesse said softly. "Before he got strung up outside Carson." The reply caught Silas off guard, but he only nodded. "You've got grit," he said. The boy beamed just a little. Silas stood, turned to Clara, and handed her the Colt. "Take this. You'll stay in the saloon." She stared at the weapon, then at him. "Why not you?" "I've got something else to finish." Then he did what no one expected. He took the scorched badge from the photograph, the one from Red Hollow, and pinned it to his chest. Kettler blinked. "You're wearing it again." "I never stopped carrying it," Silas replied. "It's time they remembered who I was, and who I'm not." He mounted his horse and rode out before the argument could follow. At the mouth of Broken Mesa, the riders had stopped. Vexler waited, boots planted in dry sand, coat fluttering in the rising wind. Beside him, the 7th rider dismounted. He removed his hat, revealing a face half burned, jaw twisted from the old fire. Marshal Call, or whatever was left of him, stood like a man risen from a bad legend. Silas approached on foot, stopping 10 paces away. "Thought I saw you die," he called. "You did," Call rasped, "but dying didn't take." Silas tilted his head. "Then why come back?" "To finish the story," Call growled. "You walked away from Red Hollow, Mercer. Thought you could bury it. But the land remembers." Vexler stepped forward. "He's right. You betrayed your own crew." Silas smiled, dry as dust. "I betrayed you, not the law." "Law don't live out here," Call spat. "Only legacy." The tension cracked like dry wood. Then came the first shot. It wasn't from Silas. It was from Clara. From the top window of the Silver Lantern, she fired one clean round into the hat of the rider on the left flank. It didn't kill him, but it spun him hard enough to start a panic. The townsfolk rose from cover. Kettler fired first. Doc Quinn followed. Even Grace Tully held her pistol with steady hands, sending lead into the dust. The gang reeled. Silas charged. He went straight for Vexler. The outlaw drew and fired twice, both shots missing wide. Silas moved like memory, fast and sure, his boots crunching over stone. He dropped low, swept Vexler's legs out, and pinned him beneath a knee. "Why'd you do it?" Silas hissed. Vexler laughed, teeth red. "Because nobody remembers quiet men, only the ones who leave scars." Call shouted something, raising his rifle, but Jesse had found a perch on the chapel roof. His slingshot cracked, hitting the rifle's barrel. Call's shot went wide. Silas looked back once. Then he turned to face Call. "You made me a ghost," he said. "But I remember." Call sneered. "So come on then. Let's finish it." They met in the middle. No crowd, no jury, just the wind, the grit, and two broken men who had once stood side by side. The fight was brutal, close. Call fought with hatred. Silas fought with something deeper. Regret turned into resolve. At last, with a grunt and a twist, Silas brought Call to the ground. He held him there, breathing hard. "You burn everything you touch," Silas said. Call spat blood. "So do you." Silas didn't deny it, just looked away. "I'm not here to kill you." Call frowned. "Then why?" "To end you." He took the burned badge from his chest and pressed it into Call's hand. "You wear it now. Let it burn you from the inside." Then he turned and walked away. Behind him, Vexler rose shakily, only to be met with Clara's rifle aimed dead center. "Don't," she said, voice ice. Vexler raised his hands. "Drop it," she ordered. He did. Silas approached and cuffed the outlaw with irons pulled from the box beneath the saloon floor. Relics from another life, one that finally made sense again. The battle was over, but the storm hadn't ended. That night, Silas sits on the saloon roof, looking at the stars. Clara asks, "What now?" He answers, "I reckon the town gets to decide if it wants to forgive or just forget." In the end, a man's shadow is measured not by how far it stretches, but by what he leaves behind. The wind came in low, whispering across the prairie like it had something old to confess. It carried the scent of burnt mesquite and wild sage, of horses long gone and rain not yet fallen. Gallows Creek sat quiet in its wake, not broken, not healed, but holding its breath. The kind of silence that settles after truths are spoken and blood has dried, but before anything like peace can take root. The chapel bell had been mended with wire and prayer. It rang once that morning, not for warning, nor for grief, but for ceremony. Silas Mercer stood at the altar, not behind it. The stained glass had shattered years ago, yet light still streamed in through the empty arches, as if holiness had decided to return on its own terms. He wore his old coat, the one that bore the faint crease of a badge no longer pinned. His hands were steady, though something in his shoulders sagged, not from defeat, but from the release of a burden long carried. Before him sat the town. Not in pews, most had been burned in the fire that took the last preacher, but in rows of chairs pulled from the saloon, from front porches, from the doc's office. Even the boy, Jesse, sat tall in a wooden stool, the sling from his slingshot dangling loose at his belt. Marshal Retton Call was gone, dead by his own hand, not long after Silas let him live. The badge Silas had returned to him was found at the base of Broken Mesa, along with a note in red ink. No man outlives what he builds on bones. Wexler sat under guard beside the chapel's back doors, wrists bound, his gaze hollow. No trial had yet been called, no gallows built. The town wasn't sure whether to hang him or just forget he ever passed through. Sometimes justice comes fast. Other times, it's as slow and bitter as winter. Sheriff Kettler, still recovering, had given Silas the pulpit for a reason. Grace had spoken with the others. Clara had pleaded her truth. Even old Harlan had nodded once, grumbling that a man who bleeds for a place deserves more than suspicion. So now all that remained was the voice of the man himself. Silas cleared his throat. "I won't ask for your forgiveness," he said, slow and measured, each word landing like boot steps in dry dust. "A man asking for that before he's earned it is just wearing another lie." He let the wind drift through the space. The flag on the church's broken pole flapped once, then settled again. "I came here to disappear. Thought if I poured enough whiskey and kept quiet long enough, the past would just stay buried. But the thing about the West, it don't care about your silence. It brings everything back with the dust." Clara watched him from the second row, eyes full, hands clasped. "I rode with men I shouldn't have, followed a lawman I thought was righteous. By the time I realized he was carving his name into gravestones, I was already part of the story. So I ran, changed my name, put my gun in a drawer." He looked out at them all, not pleading, not demanding, just offering. "But this place, it changed me. You changed me. Not by trust, not by kindness, but by giving me time. Time to think, time to watch, time to listen." He paused, then added softly, "I watched a town survive when it should have scattered. I watched a girl become a woman who could aim true. I watched a boy become a scout when the grown men still doubted their hands. I saw people make a stand, not because they believed they'd win, but because losing with dignity meant more than living with shame." Jessie smiled faintly. Clara wiped at her eye. Kettler gave a small, crooked nod. "I ain't proud of the things I done, but I'm proud of what I stood for when it counted. If that ain't redemption, then maybe there ain't no such thing." He stepped down from the altar. No applause followed. Just stillness. A silence that didn't accuse or absolve. Just accepted. Later, after Wexler was locked in the cellar beneath the old post office and the townsfolk returned to the rhythms of rebuilding, Silas found himself by the livery, fixing a busted hinge on a stall door. Clara appeared beside him, holding a tin cup of coffee. "You meant every word," she said. "I did. And if they'd turned on you, I'd have kept talking. That's the thing about truth. You don't speak it because it works. You speak it because it's all that's left." She smiled. "You staying?" He looked toward the horizon. "I think so, unless someone says otherwise." "No one will." That night, Gallows Creek lit lanterns along the main road. Not for celebration, but for remembering. A small procession walked to the hill behind the chapel, where the bones from the cistern had been buried proper. A stone marked the spot now, etched with no names, just a phrase carved by Grace Tully. "Some truths come late, but they still matter." Silas stood a while after the others left, hat in hand. Then slowly, he knelt. Not to pray, but to promise. The next morning, the town stirred earlier than usual. A letter had arrived, carried by a rider no one recognized. A woman in blue. face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. She said nothing, handed the envelope to Clara, and vanished down the road before anyone could ask her name. Clara opened it by the saloon fire. It read, "To Silas Mercer, you were never meant to vanish. You were meant to endure. Redemption doesn't erase what was done, but it gives the next chapter purpose. I reckon yours just started." There was no signature. Silas read the letter once, folded it, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. He didn't smile, but his eyes looked westward, not as a man escaping, but as one who'd finally stopped running. And when the wind picked up again, it whispered his name across the dry plains, soft as breath, but sure as thunder. Some say he stayed and rebuilt the town. Others say he rode out again to right more wrongs. But in Gallows Creek, the piano played each evening, and folks swore the barkeep moved like a shadow who had nothing left to fear. Some stories don't end with a gunshot or a farewell kiss, but with the sound of wind curling beneath a broken window, and the hush of twilight laying soft across a porch where no one sits anymore. You walk away from a tale like this not with answers, but with the weight of questions that settle slow in the belly, like creek stones worn smooth by time. You remember the faces not for what they did, but for what they carried. A half-burned badge tucked into a coat pocket. A slingshot clutched by a boy who aimed truer than most grown men. A woman who stood not behind a man, but beside him, heart bare and eyes steady. You think of the old chapel, gutted by fire, standing with its back straight as if redemption might return like an echo. You see the saloon's cracked mirror, where a man once watched himself age beneath the dust, wondering if silence was a kind of mercy or a slow death dressed in peace. You remember the sound of horse hooves on dry earth, the echo fading like a name no one dares to speak aloud. You hear the chapel bell, wire-bound and tired, ringing not for mourning, but for memory. You feel the dry parchment of a letter too long unopened, wax seal flaking like old guilt, and within it, not judgment, but understanding. You recall a grave marked not by names, but by a single line etched in stone. Some truths come late, but they still matter. You see wildflowers growing where boots once trampled, soft petals defying the scars in the earth. You remember the sky above Gallows Creek, sometimes crimson with warning, sometimes silver with hope, always watching. You carry the rhythm of voices, a boy whispering strategy, a woman loading her rifle with trembling grace, an old sheriff dragging himself upright one last time for the sake of a town that never asked to be saved. You remember the silence after the smoke, the way it hung like breath held too long, the way it finally exhaled into forgiveness. You feel the pull of names once feared, now spoken soft with reverence or regret. You hear the creak of saddle leather, the rustle of prairie grass, the clink of spurs walking away from violence toward something harder. Peace. You remember how the wind carried a name, not to celebrate it, but to remind the world it had not been erased. You think of a man who knelt without prayer, who buried bones with his own hands and spoke not of glory, but of grace. You recall the sharp weight of decisions made in the space between breaths. You remember that sometimes the most courageous thing a man can do is stay. You hold close the slow rebuilding of a town, too small for history books, yet wide enough to hold truth, sorrow, and second chances. You remember the cracked leather of an old journal, the ink nearly vanished, but still refusing to be forgotten. You remember that justice, though late, cast its light just enough to show the path forward. You remember that the forgotten woman was never truly forgotten. She had merely waited long enough for a man to remember how to listen. You remember that the truth does not demand a crowd, only a keeper. You think of all the quiet gestures, cornbread baked at dawn, a broken piano tuned one key at a time, a child offering a flower where blood once dried. You remember the hush before a stand, and the peace that only comes when someone finally stands tall. You see the final sunset not as an ending, but as a slow exhale, painting the town in gold before the stars arrive. You feel the pages of the story close, not with finality, but with reverence, as if someone had blown out an oil lamp, not because the light had run out, but because it was finally safe to sleep. And if you still believe that honor, even when buried, can find its way back to the surface, if you believe that the smallest kindness can unmake a long-held bitterness, if you believe that a man once feared can become the keeper of peace, then leave a sign, a soft one, a comment, a candle, a moment of quiet remembrance. Let the wind know you heard the story, and that you believe there's still a place for men like Silas Mercer. And if you wish to hear another tale, told by lamplight and memory, subscribe to our channel, where the next story waits, carried gently on the wind.